The following video contains spoilers both visual and descriptive for Astro Bot, so if you haven't played the game and want to go in blind, well, just let the video run out and don't look at it. I still need the watch time. Delight. The space between joy and surprise. It's a feeling that's very hard to come by as we age, but for children, delight is abundant. Think of a balloon, crunchy leaves on the ground in autumn, a hamster in a pet shop. The world is just boundless wonder and possibility when you're a little child, growing up, discovering everything around you. But for us haggard, jaded adults, that feeling is about as rare as a games journalist without a blue sky profile. But Astro Bot, fresh from its crowning as 2024's Game Awards Game of the Year, surely they need a better name for these, Marios or Chiefs or Linkies or Jeffs or something, is a game that trades in pure delight. Now, what might look like a cutesy 3D platformer for kids with its bright, bold colours and little friendly little robot dude, and in many ways it is that, but it is actually a masterclass in joy, underpinned by meticulous, pin-sharp game design. It is a pure video game and a game about the joy of video games, and yes, an absolutely deserving winner of the Game of the Year. And I'm going to explain why. Now listen, I can understand some of the backlash, but only from those who haven't played it. Like, does it have the systemic depth and storytelling of Metaphor ReFantazio? Well, I don't know actually, because I haven't played Metaphor ReFantazio, so my opinion on it is ultimately worthless. Just like anybody who hasn't played anything's opinion is ultimately worthless. The idea of being able to have an opinion about a video game if you can't even be bothered to play it is absolute madness to me. And that's perhaps because I've spent so many years as a games journalist before, as a consultant in the industry. But to dismiss something without playing it and think that that opinion carries weight is fucking stupid. So let's take a look at some of the ideas that are running through Astro Bot. And in truth, a lot of those ideas are pretty familiar. You start out moving around this kind of space map, which is not dissimilar to the map in Mario Galaxy 2, and then you can jump into a bunch of brightly coloured, exciting looking worlds to go and ultimately get to the end of the level from front to back and find a bunch of stuff on the way. So far, so 3D platformer, but we don't kill first person shooters for looking like other first person shooters, we don't kill other RPGs for looking like other RPGs, and so Astro Bot shouldn't be killed for borrowing, for lending stuff from some of the greats in the genre, and bear in mind, from some of the greatest games of all time from Nintendo. But as much as it treads familiar ground, there are so many ideas packed into every single one of its levels that even the moments where it feels really familiar, it almost feels just like a nod to a Mario Galaxy or a Mario Sunshine, rather than it's ripping anything off. Each of its levels are built into this kind of 3-act structure, which is very similar to how the levels in Mario 3D World are designed. So there is a Japanese philosophy of writing, actually, called Kishu Tenketsu, it's difficult for me to say, which the Mario designers use in developing their levels, particularly from Mario 3D Land onwards. So you introduce a concept, and then in the next panel, you develop the idea a little bit more. In the third panel, there's something of a change up, and then in the fourth panel, you have your conclusion. And each of Astro Bot's levels do this. They'll introduce an idea, whether it's a new mechanic like the massive punching gloves, or the time slowing down mechanic, or one of the other power-ups, or just some wrinkle to the level design. They'll embellish upon that, they'll switch it up with a boss coming in or the level completely changing upon itself, and then you reach a conclusion, whether it's a boss battle, whether it's a final moment. It's very, very difficult. I mean, nothing's very difficult in the game, but it is much harder or much more challenging or much more spectacular than the rest of the levels. If you go through all of the levels, all of them follow pretty much this formula, and they also are absolutely packed with things to find, things to discover, secrets. And the true beauty of the game is not just getting to the end of the levels, like with many 3D platformers. You're encouraged to move off the beaten path every single time and find, well, these little other Astro Bots, the little PlayStation references. But even then, every time you move from the beaten path, there's just some little delight to find. Everything that you prod in this game has feedback to it. Something happens. And you're moving through idea to idea to idea so quickly as you move between the levels, and even in the levels themselves, that you just get that same childlike feeling of utter delight as you're going through it. It really is very, very special indeed. And you remember earlier when I spoke about a kid just kicking through all the crunchy leaves in autumn. Have you tried doing that as an adult? I mean, preferably if there's not people watching you, so you feel a bit awkward, but still pretty fun. Still pretty fun. Now in the back of your mind you might think, yeah, I've kind of fucked up the guy who has to sweep all these job up. Stuff you don't really think about as a kid, but still. But in Astro Bot, you can basically do that constantly. The game is absolutely full of stuff, just bits. Look at the Christmas level here where you're kicking through all the sort of jingle bells everywhere. Everything, there's just a bunch of fucking balls will just fall about and you can just boot them all about the place. It's almost like the developers are using the grunt, the power of the PS5 to just chuck as much stuff at you and it all responds in a really satisfying and physical way. So even if you're not necessarily just going from A to B, even if you're not speed running a level, there's just stuff to play with the whole time. And it feels amazing. Now, they're the only developer as well, Team Asobo, has actually got the hang of the PlayStation 5 DualSense controller. I forgot what it was called then. DualSense controller. They did it in Astro's Playroom, which was the pack-in game. We will be walking across grass and it actually feels like ding, ding, ding. You can feel it in your hands in the controller. Now, almost no other developer have really got the hang of this thing, of this controller. Yes, you get some games where it's a bit tighter to pull the trigger to shoot or pull an arrow or something, but it gets in the way quite a lot of the time. But this team nails it, and at every moment the game just feels amazing. Now you could play it without any of that stuff, without any of the haptics, and it would still feel amazing because of the use of animation, the use of sound, the use of physics. Everything is perfect, but it just adds layers on. The force, I mean, Nintendo came up with this idea in the first place. The Rumble Pack on the N64, force feedback. They were the ones that came up with the idea in the first place to have something physically going on in your hands to add to the level of immersion that's going on screen. And obviously everybody uses it now. PC players though, they don't really have that. You got the click of the mouse, I guess, but they don't really have that. But everybody who's played on consoles experienced that stuff for years, and everybody who now has a modern phone has experienced the satisfaction of haptics, of that kind of feedback. No game does it better than this, but it also packs every single level with stuff to just kick and boot and prod. Everything has a reaction. There's a funny story that I remember from my time as a games journalist. It's when the original Gears of War came out. I worked on a magazine called Games TM, and the reviewer at the time wasn't me, it was a colleague of mine. He was adamant that he wanted to give the game a 10, and actually not unlike Astro Bot, that was a game just packed with ideas. It was revolutionary at the time with the cover mechanic, and everywhere you turned it was like Resident Evil 4, something else was happening, this idea. But the boss at the time, the editor-in-chief who was in charge of a bunch of magazines, picked a small section of the game where you guys walk down what's like a pier or a jetty or a harbour, something like that, and he shot into the water and no splashes, the bullets didn't make any splashes, and he was adamant because of that the game couldn't receive a 10 out of 10, and we had huge arguments for days in the office about this. Now it sounds ridiculous, but it's always stuck in my mind because he's even older than me, and he grew up with the idea of always wanting to prod at the edges of a video game, and that's still a sensation that people have these days, but it was very much from the dawn of video games that we experienced at the beginning all the way through. You pushed, what happens if I do this? Have they programmed in a reaction to this? And so to him, we have this game at the time, Gears of War 1, which looked like nothing we'd ever seen before and had all these ideas, but because they hadn't programmed that in, for him at the time, it completely destroyed any immersion. Now it is the game ended up getting a 10 in a magazine. We managed to talk him out of it, but it's almost like one of the developers from Astro Bot was in the room for those arguments, because there's not a pixel in this game that doesn't have a physical reaction to anything you might do with it. And as adults, that's great. As kids, that's great. That's what you want. And it really just reinforces this idea, this feeling of delight that is absolutely prevalent through all of it. Now, like I said, as adults, you don't really feel delight that much. Maybe with a particular meal, a succulent Chinese meal perhaps, but it's not like when you're kids, when you have that sense of wonder. We become jaded, we become cynical, nothing so novel anymore. We understand how the machinations of everything works, we see behind the curtain too much. But there is a way we do still experience delight, albeit fleetingly, and that is the feeling of nostalgia, and so many companies know this and they use it to sell stuff to us. And that's one of the arguments I've heard against Astro Bot, that it is ultimately a big advert for PlayStation. Now, I understand that point of view, but I do think that's facile. I think you could call it content marketing, perhaps, if we're being all cynical and middle managery about it. But in truth, Astro Bot is just a love letter to games and to the PlayStation. Now, it could quite easily lose all of its callbacks, its references, its kind of PlayStation worship that's the centerpiece of the whole thing, and it would still be a 3D platformer right up there with the greatest, right up there with the 3D Marios. And it doesn't shirk its influences. In fact, the devs actually thanked Nintendo, of all people, during their acceptance speech at the Jeffs, at the Game Awards. But there's no doubt that it is absolutely packed to the rafters, packed to the brim with PlayStation references. So you go around every single level and you have to rescue Astro Bot. You've had to do that in every Astro Bot game. Rescue other little Astro Bots that have gone and got themselves lost, or they're in trouble, bunch of idiots. So you beat the final boss and then you rescue a classic PlayStation character. I'm not going to spoil them all, even if you're not planning to play the game, because at some point you might, but I will spoil one, okay, and we're going to show some of it. You rescue Astro Bot version of Kratos and Atreus from the newer God of War games, and then you go into a level based upon those characters. So there's 5 different ones of these levels. They're all absolutely brilliant, classic, perfectly pitched PlayStation classics. And this one, honestly, I preferred this God of War reference Astro Bot level to God of War Ragnarok. Now, I've got my own problems with God of War Ragnarok. Maybe I'll speak about those on another video another time, but you're talking about people, developers that truly understand the core of these games, the core of what makes them appealing, the core of what people love about them. They're able to recreate that using Astro Bot's own mechanics and little wrinkles upon there to make it feel still very much like an Astro Bot level. And it is just, you're just grinning ear to ear from the beginning to end of these levels. All 5 of them are just perfect. They take the piss just the right amount of what they're referencing. It's all like partly, it's like when you're taking a piss out of a mate that you really love. Like, it's all done with love. And honestly, that is one of the true feelings that you get out of all of Astro Bot. You know when something's baked and you can feel that it's baked with love. When you taste it, you can feel that. You know, I'm a big on energy transfer. You can feel the love and passion that has been poured into this game, along with the hard work and precision. The love and passion in every single pixel, in every single megabyte of this game. You can feel it. The design, the meticulous polish, the reiteration upon reiteration upon reiteration, the unbelievable amount of testing that must have gone into every inch of this game to make it feel this perfect the whole way through. This is running flawlessly. Looks incredible. 0 bugs. Even without all the PlayStation stuff in there, it would still be right up there. But it just adds the sizzle to the steak as far as I'm concerned. I love it. I love it. It is like, for me, it's a beautiful history trip through my entire experience from in the PlayStation eras, from me being a younger teenager until now. So it's like my whole kind of gaming history from 13 through to now, all just there in game. And then you go into the hub world and all those little characters are there and you can hit them and then they do a little reference. Beautiful, man. Much like the packed-in playroom that comes with the PS5 is another love letter to PlayStation, and you can go in and see all the 3D rendered versions of all the old consoles and all bits of kit and stuff you'd forgotten about. All that stuff makes an appearance in the final level, by the way. Now, we are in spoiler territory here, but that turns into like a 3D shooter. It has the Space Harrier music for no reason whatsoever other than the fact that it's fucking cool. And that is just like absolutely crammed with just brilliance. I'm not even spoken about the boss fights, by the way. All of them fantastic. All of them, again, adhering to that structure. They bring in an idea, embellish the idea, switch up, and then conclusion with the craziness. Every single time, brilliant. In a world where gaming has increasingly been taken away from the artists and into the hands of the salesmen, the grubby hands of the salesmen, of the corpos, where gambling mechanics permeate core design principles, from gacha bullshit and FIFA, FC, card packs, to the very loot, grind, repeat cycle that underpins so many games these days. How great is it to once again, I say once again because Baldur's Gate 3, a completely different type of game, but very much of the same principles. How great is it again to celebrate a game that itself celebrates the true majesty of this medium. Astro Bot, an absolute fucking delight. Guys, thank you so much for watching. If you want more videos like this from me, just drop a subscribe. Let me know down in the comments. drop a like on the video. If you haven't played Astro Bot yet, I'd highly recommend it. I mean, you should know that by this video by now. And listen, I'll see you all soon. This is John from Invert Y. Catch you later. Peace.